is faithful? Don't have sex with an animal. Now, we'll need to talk about why anybody would want to do that. But God says, don't have sex with an animal. Why? I'm the Lord. What does that teach us about God? Or about God's world? Is it possible that there is a gulf fixed between me and the animal world, and that is to remind me there's a gulf fixed between me and God? That as I cannot become one with the animal, neither can I somehow magically become one with God. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen from His side in grace and mercy. So God begins to teach His people that His character is different from what they might have assumed on the basis of the other gods. This God is absolutely dependable. Now, I've written the Hebrew letters up there for you to look at for your own amazement. But what the Hebrew people learn is that God is true in relationships. God is utterly true to His Word. He is utterly true to what He has said He will do. Holiness is truth. It is dependability. It is to keep your word even if it costs you. Why? Because that's what God is. And in these chapters 18 and 20, that are so almost completely oriented toward sexual behavior, one of the things that we're seeing there is be true to your spouse. Don't go over the line with your children. Don't go over the line with your in-laws. Don't go over the line with your brothers or sisters. Don't go over the line with your parents. You must be faithful to your spouse. We see it in other ways. Love your neighbor. Why? To be faithful to them. So holiness is, as God teaches them, absolute dependability. Holiness is also complete rightness. Now, we often see the word in the Bible, righteousness, and that has unfortunately become a little too narrowed in its connotations for most of us. No, God does what is right in every circumstance. The word is tzedek. God does what is right. He does what is right for the child, what is right for the parent, what is right for the world. And the Hebrews going into exile, having lost their nation, having seen the holy temple burned to the ground, having seen children brutally murdered, having experienced awful torture themselves, they go off into exile, perhaps stripped completely naked, collars on their necks and chains. And what do they say? God, you have done the right thing. The pleasant thing? No. The cheerful thing? No. The thing we might like for ourselves? No. But right? Yes. Now, where have they come to that conception of the holy God? Because God has called them to do the right thing in every circumstance. Now you say, how do you know what's the right thing? And a very simplistic answer is, it is that thing which is most in keeping with the nature of every person, every thing in the complex. Is it right for me to beat my wife senseless? No. That is not right. Is it right for me to take money that I did not earn and someone else did? No. Now again, where do I come up with that concept of rightness? There's a certain circularity here. It's because God says, I am holy and you must do what is right. Well, what is right, God? It's this kind of thing. But as we do what is right, there is that inner witness that says, yes, that's right. So holiness is absolute dependability. It is complete rightness. And I've talked about most of these things already. He always does what is appropriate. That is normally identical with justice. But he will be right even if simple legalistic justice might conflict with it. And he will do the right thing even if that is against his best interests. But all of this is summed up in a Hebrew word which is pretty well untranslatable. This is the Hebrew word chesed. You got to get a little clearing of your throat there when you say that S, H. It's a rough H. If you ask a Hebrew, what is God's character, their answer will be chesed. Now what is chesed? We have it here on the transparency. It is passionate, undeserved loyalty to someone, especially from one in a superior position. I am on your side. Don't have to be. How true the Hebrews discovered this. They broke their covenant with God within 5 weeks. But God, who from that point on was not legally obligated to care for them at all, the rest of the Old Testament is God pouring out his love, pouring out his faithfulness, pouring out his loyalty to them. Holiness. So you may have thought I was going to say holiness is truth. Yes. Holiness is righteousness. Yes. Holiness is love. Well, I am saying that, but what I'm saying is that this understanding gives love a whole new dimension. Love has become primarily sentimentality in the English language, or passion. And in the Bible, it is really neither of those. Oh, there is an emotional component to it. There is a passionate component to it. But it is so much deeper. It is this determination to care for someone that you don't have to care for. You want to know what agape means in the New Testament? Here it is. This is it. It always involves action. You don't feel chesed, you have to do it. It ranges then all the way from kindness. When Boaz wakes up in the night with cold feet and finds this beautiful young Moabite woman lying next to him, he says, "Oh, my daughter, why have you done such chesed to me? I'm an old man. I'm ugly. Don't have any hair. Have kind of thickness around the middle. And a lovely young woman like this, you didn't have to do that. Thank you." Kindness. All the way up to that completely undeserved mercy. I deserved execution at your hands, and you reached out and hugged me as your son. Chesed. In the end, then, it incorporates our English word love, it incorporates our English word mercy, it incorporates our English word grace, and it still isn't exhausted. There is no one English word that can capture all that is involved in the Hebrew idea of chesed. We have to use 6 or 7 different English words as we try to say, well, here chesed is a little more toward the grace side, here it's a little more toward the mercy side, here it's really close to what we think of as love at its highest, but it's one idea. This is the holiness of God. And God is saying, I am the Lord, and I'm holy. What do you mean? You mean you're other? You're distinct from this world? You're other than creation? Well, yes. That's what Moses found out there at the burning bush. This is holy ground. This is other ground. Don't you bring that common ground here on the bottoms of your sandals. Other. Well, God, how can we be other? How can we become gods? Oh, he says, that's not what I mean. I don't mean you have to share my essence. That's not possible. You can't become infinite. You can't become all-powerful. You can't become all-knowing. No, I don't mean that. I'm holy. And what is it which really distinguishes me from the normal run of humanity? The normal run of humanity is not true, but false. The normal run of humanity is not right, but self-servingly wrong. The normal run of humanity does not display chesed. No. I want you to do good things for me, but hey, I don't owe you nothing. God says, that's what I want you to share. My character. I want you to be like me. And, dear friends, that's what God is still saying. That's what God is saying to His church in America today. Oh, will you demonstrate the character of God? Will you be true to your words, to your commitments, whether it's fun or not? Will you do the right thing in relationships, even though it may cost you a great deal? Will you allow God to do something in your heart that will give you reservoirs of chesed to pour out on people around you? Nobody loves me. Nobody cares about me. Nobody treats me kindly. How true that is in our society. But God longs to be your Lord and mine, and to pour into us from above those things so that we may be them to others. Oh my, we live in a society of people who are so broken. The family that was supposed to lay the foundation upon which then God could build is so totally fragmented that many people find themselves not on a firm foundation, but floundering in a swamp, sinking. And so the work that God wants to do among us is hampered from the outset. But He can do it if we'll let Him. He can indeed fulfill the commandment that He's given here. You must be holy, for I am holy. What does He mean? You must share my character. You must belong to me exclusively and share my character. And I wonder whether we're willing to do that or not. That's what it means to be the people of God. It doesn't mean that we've joined a church. It doesn't mean that we've been to an altar. It doesn't mean that we read the Bible 5 hours a day. It means that we belong exclusively to God and are sharing His character with Him in our daily living. I dare to suggest that the United States could do with a big dose of that. In the White House, yes, but that's not really the critical place. The critical place is in the streets, in the homes, on the roads. You and I. Well, that's holiness. Now, how does this relate to what's going on here? You say, hey, that sounds great. It's sort of high up and ethereal, but what about this stuff? Yeah? This is where it starts. This is where you learn holiness. Now, I mentioned to you in your assignments that we have these 2 chapters, 18 and 20, right here at the beginning of this passage on holy living, that have to do with sexuality. Now, why? And I ask you to look carefully at the opening paragraph in chapter 18. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. According to the doings of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do. According to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you, you shall not do. Nor shall you walk in their ordinances. You shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he will live by them. Now I want to speak carefully and I want to speak compassionately, but I also want to speak clearly. The clear statement of these chapters is these kinds of sexual behaviors characterized the Egyptians and the Canaanites. They don't characterize God, and therefore they don't characterize God's people. In these chapters, you have the whole ghastly catalog. Incest, homosexual behavior, bestiality, every kind of adultery you can imagine and some you can't imagine. There they are in vivid detail and in painful repetition. Now, why did the Egyptians and the Canaanites do those things, and why does the Lord say, that's not me? What's going on, and why go over it twice? The answer is tied up in the complexity of our sexuality. To be sure, if a person is dying of starvation or dying of thirst, they're not real concerned about sex. But if a person is normally healthy, there is something about the sex drive that is different from all the others. You only have to look at the recent furor about Viagra. Why is it such a big deal for a 65-year-old man to be able to have sex? This invites a number of ribald comments, but I will abstain. Somehow in our sexuality, our whole psyche is involved in a way which eating or drinking or sleeping, it is not involved. And so what we do with our sexuality tells what we think about the nature of reality. Who is the center of the universe? I am. And I refuse to accept any boundaries on my behavior. I am God. I will determine what is right for me. No boundaries. A worldview is involved here. So, when in the Greek cities of Ionia, the coast of Turkey today, the western coast of Turkey, when a woman was to be married, the priest was the one who deflowered her. The priest had sex with her, the virgin, before her husband did. Sexuality is at the heart of existence. It's at the heart of being. And so, when in the Canaanite culture, the god Baal has sex with a cow, that's a theological statement. There is no boundary between God and nature. There is no boundary between me and my children. There is no boundary between me and my parents. There is no boundary between me and my in-laws. There is no boundary between me and anything. That's why this kind of behavior was characteristic of Canaanite and Egyptian and Mesopotamian culture. Because they're making a theological statement. And you find the myths which are justifying this kind of behavior and acting it out and living it out. But I suspect that the practices came first and the myths came second. What is being said today in America? It is not that, well, I am a homosexual, I was born this way, my parents did this to me, I can't help but do it, and you've got to let me do it. You know, I can't help it, and you have to let me be free to do it. Odd kind of freedom. But in fact, as a friend of mine who has been heavily involved in these discussions in our church said to me after $500,000 had been spent on a task force, he said, you know what? The goal here is not the legalization of homosexual behavior. The goal here is to promote bisexuality. That I can have sex with a woman, I can have sex with a man. Hey, I can have sex with whomever I want. That's a theological statement. Does God have a right to say, this is the way you were made as a race, as a human race? Face the fact that is an aberration. Same thing is done, you may notice, with someone who is born with one limb missing. They may not participate in the temple worship. If they happen to be of a priest's family, they may indeed eat those portions of the sacrifices that belong to the priest, which is very significant, I think. Do aberrations occur in a fallen world? Yes, they do. But that doesn't mean that, in fact, they are okay. God says, this is the way you are made. And here are the distinctions. There is a boundary between you and your children. There is a boundary between you and nature. There is a boundary between you and me. And you live this out. You act it out. As an expression of your obedience to me, and of it as an expression of your willingness to have the nature of truth, the nature of righteousness, the nature of chesed determined by my character, not by your wishes. I want to say again, that if a person finds themselves with uncontrollable homosexual desire, God is not saying, you are an evil, wicked person and I want nothing to do with you. Not in the least. But what God is saying is, child, you may not gratify that desire. And that's where the rub comes. Because we in our society today are faced with persons who, experiencing one kind of aberration or another, are demanding that their situation be treated as normal, natural. And God is very explicit about that not being the case. Well, we've come to the end of our time here, and you may well want to ask some questions about these very, very touchy and significant issues. I want to say some more about chapter 19 before we go on, but I will see you next week.